The air in the county records office was thick with the smell of old paper, floor polish, and the quiet desperation of people trying to untangle their own histories. At the main counter, a small, silver-haired woman named Elara Vance stood with the unshakable calm of a statue. The clerk, a young man with a nameplate that read Chip and an expression of profound inconvenience, was doing his best to be unhelpful. "I need the deed and all historical records for the old Vance homestead," Elara said, her voice soft but clear, carrying the slight rasp of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors. Chip sighed, a long theatrical exhalation. "Ma'am, those records are archived. It's not a simple pull-and-print situation. We're talking about digging through boxes. Do you have an appointment?" Elara simply looked at him, her eyes the pale, unpiercing blue of a winter sky. "No." "Well, there you go. I can schedule you for next month," he said, already turning back to his computer screen, dismissing her. "The land was granted to my great-great-grandfather in 1886 by the United States government for service in the Civil War," Elara stated, the facts hanging in the air like a challenge. "I'm not here for a photocopy for a scrapbook. I'm here because the current owner, a corporation I've never heard of, is trying to claim they have mineral rights that predate the grant. They're threatening to drill. So, you see, it's not next month. It's now." Chip looked back at her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He was used to dealing with confused elderly people, not this precise, immovable force. "Look, even if I wanted to, the archive room is a mess. It's not cataloged properly. It would be like finding a needle in a haystack." From a back office, a deep, gruff voice rumbled. "What kind of needle, Chip?" A large man in a rumpled brown suit emerged, holding a mug of coffee that looked like it was mostly mud. He had a thick, graying mustache and the weary look of a man who had been fighting bureaucratic battles for decades. His nameplate read, Harold Finch, Senior Clerk. "Mr. Finch," Chip said, his tone shifting to one of exaggerated helpfulness. "This lady wants us to drop everything and dig through the unfiled archives for some old deed. No appointment." Harold ignored Chip and looked at Elara. "Vance Homestead, you said?" He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes studying her. "Up near the old fire tower road? The place with the stone walls that go on for miles?" A flicker of surprise crossed Elara's face. Yes, you know it?" "My grandfather used to tell stories about the old Vance place," Harold said, a distant look in his eyes. "Said your people were the first ones to really tame that land. Brought in the first herd of cattle this county ever saw. Took 3 weeks to drive them up from Texas." He set his mug down. "Chip, you're with me. We're going to the annex." Chip's jaw dropped. "The annex? But Mr. Finch, it's a disaster in there. It'll take all afternoon." "Then I suggest you get a move on," Harold said, grabbing a set of dusty keys from a hook. He gave Elara a small nod. "It might take a while, ma'am. You're welcome to wait." 2 hours later, the trio was standing in a vast, dusty basement room surrounded by towering shelves of gray archival boxes. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from a small, grimy window. And Harold had found the deed, a large, brittle document with elegant cursive script and an official government seal. Elara held it with the reverence one might afford a sacred text, but as she scanned it, her brow furrowed. This isn't the final one. The land grant was for 640 acres. This one describes the southern pasture, but not the northern ridge. Where's the rest of it?" Harold scratched his head. "That's the only one cross-referenced under your family name for that section." Elara shook her head, a deep frustration creasing her face. "The corporation's claim is on the North Ridge. If we can't prove my family owned it, they can do whatever they want." Chip, bored and covered in dust, slumped against a shelf, causing it to wobble precariously. The thin manila folder slipped from the top and fluttered to the floor at Elara's feet. It was unmarked, yellowed with age, and tied with a faded red ribbon. She bent down and picked it up. The ribbon was old, the kind of silk used in the 19th century. She untied it carefully. Inside were not land deeds, but letters. Handwritten letters on thin, almost transparent paper. The first one she pulled out was dated November 12, 1918. It was addressed to her great-grandmother, Margaret Vance. Dearest Margaret, the world has gone mad with celebration, but my heart is heavy. The armistice has come, but my Joseph will not be coming home. He fell in the Argonne forest. The official letter said it was a bullet. But I know the truth. It was a machine gun, a new kind of devilry they used to cut men down like wheat. I saw them, Margaret. The BARS, or the Shoshats. But there was one. One the men whispered about. A German gun they called the trench sweeper. It spat death so fast. The letter was from a family friend, a young woman named Clara who had served as a nurse near the front. The rest of the folder was filled with more letters, chronicling a dark family secret. Ilara's great-uncle, Joseph Vance, hadn't just been a soldier. He was a man with an uncanny, almost supernatural gift for machinery and ballistics. Before the war, he had been a quiet, brilliant blacksmith and tinkerer who could look at a broken plow and forge a better part from scratch. The letters, written to his mother and sister, described his time in the trenches. But they weren't the typical soldier's letters. They were filled with sketches and technical observations. And he was obsessed with the weapons of the war. He would collect discarded pieces of metal from no man's land, studying the rifling on a bullet, the spring mechanism of a Mauser, the devastating impact of a new explosive round. One letter, dated just a week before his death, was different. It was written on a piece of paper that felt different, thicker, almost like vellum. The handwriting was hurried, frantic. I saw it today. A captured German officer was being questioned. They had his personal effects. Among them was a single, unfired round. It was unlike anything I have ever seen. The casing was a strange, almost black metal. The tip was not lead or copper, but a dark polymer material, machined with geometric precision. The Germans called it the Schwarze Kralle, the Black Talon. It was a prototype, a secret weapon. The officer, before they took him away, he laughed and said it was a bullet that was also a key. He said it was meant for a special rifle, one that didn't just shoot, but sang. He said it was for the Jägermeister, the master hunter. They thought he was mad. But I saw the round. I felt its weight. It was not madness. It was a terrible, beautiful piece of engineering. If I could just get it apart, see the mechanism inside, the way the projectile must be designed to fragment or expand. I've made sketches. I have to get this home. This knowledge can't be lost. It's too important. They're sending me on patrol tonight. If something happens, Margaret, please keep this safe. It is the key to something. I don't know what, but I feel it. There were no more letters from Joseph. Ilara sat on a dusty crate in the archive basement. Now the letters spread around her. Harold and Chip stood by, forgotten. She felt as if she had stumbled upon a ghost. Her great-uncle, a man she'd only ever seen in a single faded photograph, was a genius of applied physics. A man decades ahead of his time, his life cut short by the very machinery he sought to understand. The corporation, the drilling rights, all of it suddenly seemed trivial. In her hands, she held the legacy of a forgotten inventor, the Black Talon, a key. It took her a month to piece together the rest of the story. Following the clues in Joseph's letters, she went back to the Vance homestead, now a dilapidated farmhouse she had inherited but never lived in. The current tenant, an old man who had rented the land for years, told her about a sealed-off root cellar that had collapsed decades ago. And no one had ever bothered to clear it out. With the help of a local contractor, she had the cellar excavated. Under a pile of collapsed timbers and earth, they found a rusted, military-issue footlocker. It was Joseph's. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were his notebooks, dozens of them. They were filled with meticulous sketches, complex mathematical formulas, and detailed observations on everything from artillery trajectories to the molecular structure of different types of steel. The final notebook was devoted entirely to the Schwarze Kralle. Based on the brief glimpse he'd had of the bullet and his own innate understanding of physics, Joseph had reverse-engineered the concept. His notes theorized a projectile that was not just a lump of metal, but a sophisticated piece of munitions. The polymer tip was designed to initiate a specific, the delayed deformation upon impact, creating a devastating, controlled wound profile. But more than that, his sketches showed a rifle with a unique, complex bolt-action mechanism. It wasn't just a gun. It was a delivery system, a platform engineered specifically to handle the immense pressures and unique ballistic properties of this radical new round. He had drawn schematics for a weapon of terrifying precision. The final entry in the notebook was heartbreaking. It was a design for the rifle itself, complete down to the last spring and screw. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "The general was impressed with my sketches of the captured round. He said if I could build the rifle, it would change warfare. He called it my Black Talon mark. I told him I didn't want to build a weapon of war. I just wanted to understand it. He didn't understand. No one does. I just want to go home and shoe horses." Ilara understood. Her great-uncle wasn't a warmonger. He was a scientist, an artist of metal and mechanics, who had been confronted with a horrifying new technology and his own mind's inability to look away from its terrible beauty. She had the notes, the history, the proof of her family's deep and complicated roots on this land. Armed with Joseph's notebooks, which documented the land and his life there in intimate detail, she was able to fight the corporation's claim. The notebooks, with their dated entries and references to the landscape, were far more powerful than any simple deed. The case was settled out of court. The victory over the corporation should have felt complete. Ilara had saved her family's land. Not with a lawyer's argument, but with a dead man's genius. But the rusted footlocker and its contents had cracked open a door in her mind that she couldn't close. The world she had known, a world of quiet retirement, gardening, and genealogy, now felt thin like a painted backdrop. Behind it, she now sensed a vast, shadowy landscape of secrets and unfinished business. Joseph's words haunted her. It is the key to something. The general. Who was the general? And what had happened to Joseph's ideas after he died in the Argonne forest in 1918? The notebooks were a treasure, a complete theoretical and practical blueprint for a weapon system decades ahead of its time. Had they just sat in a collapsed root cellar for 100 years, undisturbed? Or had someone known they were there? She began with the letters. Clara. The nurse who had written to her great-grandmother had lived in a nearby town. A search of old census records led Ilara to a Clara Johansson who had never married and died in the 1960s. But she had left a will, and her few possessions had been donated to a local historical society. A few phone calls later, Ilara was driving to a small museum in a town she'd never heard of. The museum was a single room in an old firehouse, run by a volunteer named Gertie, a sprightly woman in her 80s with a keen memory. When Ilara mentioned Clara Johansson's name, Gertie's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes, Clara was a dear. She was my Sunday school teacher. Gave the museum a box of her things years ago, mostly photographs and trinkets from her nursing days. I think it's in the back." While Gertie rummaged, Ilara looked around. Near the museum was a collection of the county's forgotten past. Old farm tools, a World War I uniform, yellowed wedding dresses. Gertie returned with a small cardboard box. Inside, alongside some sepia-toned photographs of nurses in a field hospital, was a leather-bound diary. It was Clara's. Ilara thanked Gertie profusely and practically ran back to her car. She sat in the parking lot and began to read. Clara's handwriting was small and neat, Her diary was a chronicle of horror and hope, of young men with missing limbs and haunted eyes. And then, in an entry dated January 1919, several months after the war's end, Alara found it. A strange man came to the hospital today. An American, but not a soldier. He was very official, very stern. He asked about Nurse Vance's brother, Joseph. He said he was from the War Department, and he wanted to know if Joseph had sent any packages or letters home before he died. He was particularly interested in any drawings or sketches. Margaret had received a package from Joseph just before he was killed, but she had already sent it home to their mother. I didn't tell him that. I didn't like his eyes. They were cold, like a fish's. He asked if I had ever seen Joseph with any unusual objects. I lied and said no. I remembered Joseph showing me the sketch of the strange bullet once, but it felt like a secret I should keep. After the man left, I wrote to Margaret, warning her. I hope my letter reached her in time. Ilara's blood ran cold. The cold eyes hadn't been from the War Department. They were from somewhere else. Someone had known about Joseph's work. Someone had come looking for it, barely a month after the armistice. And the package Clara mentioned, the one Margaret sent home, that must have been the very letters Ilara now possessed, including the one describing the Schwarze Kralle. The man had been too late, but he had been looking. The diary sent her down a new path. She needed to know who that man was and what organization he truly represented. This was beyond genealogy. This was espionage. She started searching for any record of early 20th century government intelligence agencies. The CIA didn't exist then. Its predecessor, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, wasn't formed until World War II. So who was operating in Europe in 1919? Her research led her to a shadowy and largely forgotten entity, the Corps of Intelligence Police, CIP, a small plainclothes counterintelligence unit of the U.S. Army. Their records were spotty at best, many lost in a fire in the 1920s. But she found a name mentioned in a declassified historical document online. A Captain Alistair Finch. He had been a member of the CIP, stationed in France during and immediately after the war. His post-service record was a blank. It was as if he had vanished. Finch. The name echoed in her mind. It was an uncommon name. Harold Finch, the senior clerk in the records office who had helped her, the one whose grandfather had told stories about the Vance place. It couldn't be a coincidence. She drove straight back to the county records office. Harold was at his desk, nursing his usual mug of mud-like coffee. He looked surprised to see her. "Miss Vance," he said, standing up, "back for another deed? I hope the corporation isn't giving you more trouble." "No, Mr. Finch," Ilara said, her voice steady. "I'm here about your family." She placed a printout of the CIP document on his desk, with Captain Alistair Finch's name circled. "Was he your grandfather?" Harold's face went pale. He slowly sat back down, his eyes fixed on the name. He was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked up at Ilara, his expression a mixture of shock and a deep, weary recognition. "How did you find this?" "It's a long story," Ilara said. "And it's one I think you're a part of. The stories your grandfather told you about the Vance place, what were they really about?" Harold took a shaky sip of his coffee. "He didn't tell me," he said quietly. "He told my father, on his deathbed. My father told me just before he passed, as a family legend. A warning, maybe?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "My grandfather, Alistair, was sent to Europe after the war. Not to fight, but to find things and people. He was looking for German scientists, engineers, anyone with special knowledge. But he was also looking for something else, a weapon, a prototype bullet, and the plans for a rifle to fire it. The Germans called it the Black Talon. His orders came from the very top, he said, from a group of men in Washington who weren't in the regular army, men who were already thinking about the next war. Ilara felt the world tilt slightly. He was looking for my great-uncle's work. Harold nodded slowly. He tracked the letters. He found Nurse Clara. He was the man with the cold eyes she wrote about, but he was too late. The package with the first letter had already been sent to the Vance homestead. By the time he got leave to come here, to this very county, and the family was in mourning, he posed as a friend of Joseph's from the war. He was invited into the house. He met Joseph's mother, your great-great-grandmother. He looked for the notebook, the sketches. He searched the house when they were at church. He couldn't find anything. He assumed Joseph's work had been lost in the war or destroyed. He reported back that the trail was cold. He spent the rest of his life feeling like a failure. He told my father that he always felt he had missed something, that he should have looked harder in a different place. He never knew about the root cellar. Ilara leaned against the counter, her legs weak. The past and present were colliding. The man who had tried to steal her family's secret was Harold Finch's grandfather. And now, a century later, his descendant was the one who had unknowingly helped her find it. It was a strange, circular justice. "There's more," Ilara said, her voice a whisper. "I found the notebooks. In the root cellar, everything. The bullet design, the rifle, it's all there." Harold stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of 100 years of secrets pressed down on the dusty office. "What are you going to do with them?" Harold finally asked. It was the question Ilara had been asking herself ever since she lifted the footlocker from the ground. She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she knew with a chilling certainty that her journey was only just beginning. If Alistair Finch had been sent by a shadowy group of men in 1919, that group, or its spiritual descendants, almost certainly still existed. And if they had been looking for the Black Talon then, they would be looking for it now. The key had been found, and Ilara was now holding the lock.